The first thing the Nari noticed about the human ship was how quiet it was. No weapon signatures, no power surge, no attempt to hail with rank or threat or formal declaration of strength. The vessel just drifted into docking range and waited, the way a leaf floats down onto water. The Nari dock controller stared at his screen for a full 10 seconds before he remembered to open the channel. Vessel, state your designation and purpose. A pause. Then a voice came through, relaxed and a little hoarse, like the man on the other end had just woken up from a nap. This is the human liaison team. We're here for the treaty settlement. Darius Cole speaking. Do we need to fill out arrival forms, or is someone going to tell us where to park this thing? The dock controller looked at his superior. His superior looked at the ship. The ship was very small. They let it land. Darius Cole walked down the boarding ramp first, the way he did everything, without making a production of it. He was a medium-built man in his early 30s with dark circles under his eyes and a jacket that had seen better years. Behind him came Suri, his junior colleague, clutching a data pad to her chest and trying very hard not to stare at the Nari soldiers lining the hangar walls. There were 12 of them, each over 6 feet, scaled in shades of iron and amber, with the flat, still eyes of creatures that had been apex predators long before humans discovered fire. Suri was starring. She tried to stop. She kept starring. Darius looked around the hangar with mild interest, the way a man looks at a new office before deciding which chair is most comfortable. Commander Drav stepped forward. He was the head of station security, broad, dark-scaled, and carrying the particular energy of someone who had never once been told no and did not intend to start. Liaison Cole. He did not make it sound like a greeting. You are 3 minutes late. Traffic, said Darius. Drav stared at him. There is no traffic in orbital space. There was today, said Darius pleasantly, and held out his hand. Drav looked at the hand. He knew, intellectually, that this was a human greeting gesture. He chose not to take it. Darius let his hand drop without embarrassment and looked around again. So, where are we sleeping? The diplomatic quarters were, technically speaking, compliant with the treaty's minimum housing requirements. They were also sized for Nari juveniles, which meant the ceiling was low, the beds were short, and the ventilation system produced a faint hissing sound that Suri would spend the first 2 nights convinced was something alive. Darius looked at the room, dropped his bag on the short bed, and sat down. Cozy, he said. Do you want me to file a formal complaint? Suri asked, still standing in the doorway, data pad out. About what? The room is clearly designed to be uncomfortable. All rooms are uncomfortable until you've slept in them a few times. He lay down. His feet hung off the end of the bed. He did not seem to care. Write up the arrival report. I'm going to close my eyes for 20 minutes. Suri looked at him. Then she looked at the hallway, where 2 Nari soldiers had been posted outside their door, whether as escort or guard, she could not tell. Darius, we are on a Nari sovereign station. The most powerful species in this quadrant has soldiers 12 feet from our door. Are you really going to take a nap? I've been awake for 19 hours. That is not the point. It's a little bit the point. 3 levels above them, in the royal hatchery, something else was happening. Queen Sorrel had been informed 2 hours ago that the eggs were moving. This was early. The royal hatchlings were not due to crack for another 8 days, which was why the hatchery was running on a reduced staff and why no one had thought to double the locks on the ventilation access panels. The first egg cracked at 1400 station time. The second cracked 11 minutes later. The third took another 20 minutes and did so with considerably more drama, splitting almost completely in half and sending shell fragments across the room. 3 small shapes uncurled in the wreckage. Rin was the smallest, pale-scaled, already blinking with enormous golden eyes. Kale was darker, already trying to stand, failing, and trying again with the aggressive determination of someone with a great deal to prove. Asa simply sat in the middle of her broken shell and screamed at maximum volume until a nurse picked her up. They were alive. They were healthy. The nurses sent the positive report to Sorrel with visible relief. What the nurses did not report, because they did not notice it until 40 minutes later when they went to do the first feeding, was that the ventilation panel on the east wall was open. And the hatchlings were gone. Sorrel received this second report standing in her war room, in the middle of a briefing about the human delegation's arrival. She read it twice. Then, very carefully, she set it face down on the table and told the room she needed a moment. Below, 3 levels down in the small diplomatic corridor, Darius Cole was asleep. He did not know what was moving through the ventilation ducts above him, making soft, clicking sounds with tiny claws on metal. He did not know yet. But he would. The vent cover hit the floor at 300 station time with a sound like a dropped coin. Nobody in the corridor moved. The 2 guards posted outside the human quarters had switched to a skeleton crew after midnight. 1 guard, half asleep, standing at the far end of the hall. He heard the small metallic clatter, looked toward it, saw nothing, and went back to staring at the wall. 3 small shapes dropped from the open vent panel and landed on the floor in a heap. Rin untangled herself first, shook her head, and looked around with wide gold eyes. The corridor was dim, running on night cycle lighting, low blue strips along the baseboards. Everything smelled different down here. Warmer, closer. Not the clean, cold stone endozone smell of the hatchery. Something else, something alive and steady. Kale and Asa were already following it before they understood why. The door to Darius's quarters was not fully shut. The latch had been stiff since they arrived, and Darius had not bothered forcing it. It sat slightly open, an inch gap letting out a thin line of warmer air. Rin put her nose to the gap. Her nostrils flared. She pushed the door open and walked in. The room was dark and small. On the short bed against the wall, Darius Cole was flat on his back, one arm across his chest, completely and deeply asleep. His breathing was slow. His body temperature, a full 2 degrees warmer than any Draknari in the station, radiated into the cool room like a small, steady furnace. Rin crossed the floor, put both front feet on the edge of the bed frame, hauled herself up, and walked directly onto his chest. Darius did not wake up. Rin turned around twice, a small tight circle, and lay down in the hollow between his collarbones. The warmth hit her all at once, seeping into her scales, into the thin, unfinished places where her ridges hadn't fully hardened yet. She made a sound very low in her chest, a sound she had never made before, a sound that was not a cry or a hiss but something else entirely, a slow, steady vibration. Kale climbed up a minute later. He picked the center of Darius's ribcage, tested it with 1 foot, found it acceptable, and settled. Asa spent 3 full minutes circling the bed, making quiet, indignant noises, before she accepted that the only available warm surface was already claimed. She climbed up last, walked directly over Kale, ignored his annoyed grunt, and draped herself across Darius's forehead like a living headband, chin resting on the bridge of his nose. Darius's breathing didn't change. All 3 of them were vibrating now, low and slow, the sound too deep to quite hear but present enough to feel. It filled the small room. It was the first time any of them had felt warm since the shells broke. They slept. Darius slept. In the morning, Suri knocked on the adjoining door at 6:30, the way she did every day, expecting the usual 2-second delay before Darius said, "Come in." She waited, knocked again, pushed the door open. She saw the hatchlings before she understood what she was seeing. Her brain processed, small, scaled, 3 of them piled on a sleeping man. Then it processed, royal hatchlings. Then, missing royal hatchlings, which meant every soldier on this station was currently looking for them. She made a sound. The sound was not words. It was a high, compressed noise that started somewhere behind her sternum. Darius opened one eye. "Quiet," he said. "There are," her voice was barely a whisper, stretched tight with the effort of not being louder. "Darius, there are 3 of them. On you. I know. You know. Woke up around 400. Didn't want to move and scare them." Sci stared at him. "You have been awake since 400 with 3 missing royal dragon hatchlings on your person, and you did not wake me. You needed sleep." "That is not," she stopped. She looked at the hatchlings. Asa had shifted in her sleep and was now half draped over one of Darius's eyebrows, her tiny tail curled against his temple. Kull was producing a small amount of smoke from his nostrils with each exhale. Run had her eyes half open now, watching Sai with calm gold eyes and showing no intention of moving. Sai pulled out her data pad with slightly shaking hands and started writing. She wrote for several minutes. Then she stopped and said quietly, "Darius, hatchling bonding in Druknari culture is a sacred developmental stage. If they've attached to a non-Druknari, there may not be a record of that ever happening. This could be a significant." "Sai, what? Can we have this conversation after I've had something to eat? My back is starting to hurt." He moved slowly to sit up. The hatchlings adjusted without waking. Run flowed to his shoulder. Kull gripped his shirt. Asa transferred to the top of his head and stayed there. Darius sat up with a dragon perched above each ear and one hanging off his collar like a scarf, and reached for the ration bar on the bedside shelf. He broke a small piece off, held it near Run. She sniffed it, ate it in one quick bite. Then she made the low vibration sound again, louder this time, and pressed the side of her face against his jaw. Sai wrote 6 more lines in her notes, jaw tight with the effort of being professional about it. In the hatchery 3 floors up, the nurses had been awake all night. In the security office, Commander Druv had been receiving reports every 20 minutes. No one had checked the human quarters. No one had thought to. The report reached Commander Druv at 7:12. He read it standing at his desk, and then he read it again, and then he set it down and breathed through his nose for a moment the way a person does when they are trying to not say out loud the first thing that comes into their head. The hatchlings were in the human quarters. All 3, alive, unharmed, and, according to the junior officer who had quietly gone to look, currently eating pieces of a human ration bar off the palm of the male liaison's hand. Druv walked to the human corridor himself. He did not bring a full unit, because this was not a battle. He brought 2 soldiers and his dignity, and he told himself both would be enough. He stopped in the open doorway. Darius was sitting on the edge of his bed with Run on his left shoulder and Kull in his lap, examining a fold in his jacket with intense reptilian focus. Asa was sitting on top of Darius's head and appeared to be trying to eat his hair. Darius looked up, "Morning, Commander." "The hatchlings," Druv said, "must be returned to the hatchery immediately." "Sure," said Darius. He looked at Run. "You hear that?" Run looked at Druv. She showed him a very small amount of her first teeth, which were the size of apple seeds and not yet dangerous. Then she turned back around and tucked her chin under Darius's collar. Druv took 1 step into the room. Kull stood up in Darius's lap, inflated his chest to roughly twice his normal size, and produced a sound that was not yet a roar but was clearly practicing to be one. Druv stopped. He told himself it was tactical. He was not going to grab a royal hatchling that didn't want to be grabbed and risk injuring it. That was all. That was the only reason. He retreated to the hallway and sent a message to the senior hatchery staff. The senior staff arrived 20 minutes later and spent 40 minutes attempting to lure, coax, distract, and gently herd the hatchlings out of the human quarters. The hatchlings sat on Darius's person and regarded all of these attempts with the blank calm of creatures that had decided where they were and could not be reasoned with. Darius helped where he could. He tried setting each hatchling down near the hatchery staff, speaking calmly, explaining that they needed to go. The hatchlings went, and then within 3 minutes they came back, navigating around legs and boots to find him again and climb up. At the end of 40 minutes, the hatchery chief sent a message to Queen Sorrel that said, simply, "The hatchlings will not leave the human." The reply came back in under a minute, "Do not force them." Which was how Darius ended up attending his first formal diplomatic briefing with Kull asleep on his shoulder, Run draped across the back of his neck, and Asa sitting on the table between him and the Druknari cultural Udasha, occasionally poking the Udasha's data stylus with one claw. The Udasha did not react. He was too well trained to react, but his eye twitched twice. Darius took notes. He asked relevant questions. He ate a protein cube from his jacket pocket and gave the last piece to Asa when she poked his hand with her claw. "You're rewarding that behavior," Sai whispered. "She was hungry," Darius said, also whispering. "She's a royal dragon hatchling. She literally has nursing staff. She wanted this one." Sai wrote 4 lines in her notes, and then sat very still for a moment before writing 4 more. Word moved fast on a station this size. By afternoon, everyone from the fuel crew to the senior council aides had heard some version of it. The stories varied. In some versions, the human had broken into the hatchery. In others, he had some kind of chemical lure. In one version, which was entirely wrong but very popular, he had fought off a guard to get to them. The accurate version was somehow stranger than any of these. Elder Vun requested a cultural exchange meeting with the human liaison that same evening. It was officially about linguistic customs. It was not about linguistic customs. He arrived to find Darius sitting at the small desk in his quarters, reading a station operations document, with Asa asleep in his lap, and Run curled on his forearm like a bracelet, also asleep. Vun sat across from him. He was old even by Druknari standards, pale-scaled, slow-moving, with the particular patience of someone who had lived long enough to have seen many things be less surprising than they seemed. He watched Darius for a while. Darius, without looking up, reached down and adjusted Asa's tail so it wasn't hanging at an odd angle. She shifted in her sleep and made a small sound. "You are not afraid," Vun said. "Of what?" "Of us, of them, of being here." Vun tilted his head. "I have watched humans on record feeds for years. They often perform bravery. You are not performing." Darius glanced up. "I'm really just reading about water recycling outputs. It's not a brave document." Vun studied him. "You are either the bravest creature in the star system," he said slowly, "or the most ignorant." Darius considered this. "Probably both," he said, and looked back at the document. Vun sat quietly for a moment. Then something happened in his face, something shifted, loosened, and he made a sound Darius couldn't identify. It took him a second to realize it was laughter. Real laughter. Unguarded, quiet, and clearly unfamiliar to the muscles making it, like a door opened that hadn't been used in a long time. Darius looked up again. Vun was shaking his head slowly, still making the sound. "What?" Darius said. "Nothing," said Vun, "nothing at all." He left 20 minutes later without discussing linguistics once. In the hallway he passed Commander Druv and said nothing to him, but he was still almost smiling, and Druv found that, somehow, more unsettling than anything else that had happened all day, Sorrel did not come in the daytime. She had listened to 4 separate reports over 3 days, each one delivered by a different officer, each one trying to find a professional way to describe the same image. A human, sleeping, 3 royal hatchlings on his body. The hatchlings will not leave. The hatchlings are healthy. The hatchlings appear, and here each officer had paused, choosing their word carefully, content. She had asked no questions. She had not changed her expression. She had dismissed each officer calmly and gone back to her work and not thought about it, which was different from thinking about it constantly, which was what she was doing. On the fourth night she went herself. She did not announce it. She brought her honor guard, 5 soldiers, because she was the Dragon Queen and she did not go anywhere without her guard, not because she thought she needed them. They moved through the station in night cycle quiet, past the skeleton crew, past the dim blue baseboard's lights, down to the diplomatic corridor. The single guard on duty saw her and immediately stood straight. She held up one hand without looking at him. He stayed still and said nothing. She walked to the door of the human quarters. It was open, the same inch gap, the same faint warmth bleeding out into the cooler corridor air. She stopped with one hand on the door frame and looked in. The room was dark except for a faint equipment light on the medical monitor Suri had mounted on the wall. It threw enough light to see by. Darius Cole was on his back, one arm folded over his stomach, a data pad resting open on his chest where he had fallen asleep reading. His head was slightly to one side. Rin was in the hollow of his collarbone, chin tucked, scales rising and falling with his breathing. Kale was on his ribcage, curled compact, one tiny clawed foot hooked loosely around the edge of Darius's shirt. Asa was across his forehead, her tail curved down past his temple. One small wing, not yet fully grown, lay flat against his hair. All 3 were making the sound, the low, steady vibration that was too deep to hear cleanly but present enough to feel, even from the doorway. It was not a sound the hatchlings had ever made in the hatchery. The nurses had noted this. It appeared, based on what little existed in the historical record, to be a sound hatchlings only made in the presence of something they had decided was safe. The medical monitor on the wall showed Darius's heart rate, 54 beats per minute, slow, even. The graph line barely moved. He was completely, entirely asleep. Sorrel stood in the doorway. She did not move. One of her guards shifted weight behind her, the faint sound of scaled boot on floor. She did not turn. She kept her eyes on the man on the bed and the 3 small shapes sleeping on him. She was not sure how long she stood there. She had come expecting something she could categorize, a curiosity, an anomaly that could be assessed and filed. She had 3,000 years of experience and every power in this quadrant answering to her name, and she had thought she could look at this and understand it and then go back to her war room and make a decision. But the image in front of her did not file cleanly anywhere. There was no strategy here. No lure, no chemical trick, no desperate bid for diplomatic favor. The man was simply asleep, the way anything alive sleeps when it has found a place that feels safe, without armor, without defense, without the smallest awareness of how exposed he was. And her children, her royal children, born of a lineage that had commanded fear from every species in this quadrant for 30 centuries, had looked at this soft, warm, unarmored creature and made a decision. They had decided he was the safest place available. Sorrel's honor guard had served her for years, in some cases decades. In those years they had seen her face in battle, in negotiation, at the deaths of her closest advisors. Not one of them had ever seen her face look like this. She was not angry. She was not contemptuous. She looked, for the first time any of them could remember, uncertain. And that was somehow the most frightening thing they had ever seen. Not because it meant she was weak, because they had not known until now that it was possible. The moment lasted a long time. Then Sorrel stepped back from the doorway, one smooth motion, and turned. She looked at none of her guard directly. She walked back down the corridor the way she had come, quiet, upright, her pace entirely even. She stopped at the far end of the hall, just outside the corridor junction. Not a word, she said. Her guard understood. She went back to her chambers. She did not call for advisors. She did not pull up a briefing. She sat in her chair in the dark and looked at the far wall for a long time and thought about a heart rate of 54 beats per minute and what it meant that something could sleep like that, without walls, without warning, without fear, and her children had found it, out of everything on the station, and chosen it. She pulled the Human Historical Archive file at 200 station time. She told herself she would read it for 20 minutes. She was still reading at 8:20 when the light cycle shifted and the station came back to life around her. The Human Historical Archive was not a short document. Sorrel had assumed it would be. A young species, barely 600 years of spaceflight, with a home system no larger than a single small star. She had expected a few hundred pages, enough to read in an evening and put away. The archive was 11,000 pages. She read for 6 hours and did not reach the end. She did not read about their weapons first, the way she had read about every other species she had ever cataloged. She read about their disasters because there were a great number of them, and humans had a strange relationship with disaster that she had not anticipated. They ran toward it. Not all of them, not always, and not without fear. The fear was documented too, the shaking hands and the elevated pulse in the medical reports. They ran toward disasters afraid. They went in anyway. Field medic logs from their early continental wars described soldiers, non-specialist soldiers, fighters, not healers, stopping in the middle of exchanges to drag wounded enemies out of harm's way. Enemies, not allies. The records noted it as irregular behavior and filed it without resolution because no one had a satisfying explanation. Rescue mission archives showed humans entering structural collapses, burning atmospheres, flooded systems, for single individuals, sometimes animals. She found an account of a human man who had crossed a deteriorating atmospheric zone on a colony world to retrieve a neighbor's juvenile dog, and noted in his official report that the dog had looked scared. She read the first contact reports that her own people had filed. The scout team sent to assess humanity for cataloging. The scouts had reported limited threat capability, no significant psionic potential, short lifespan, physiologically fragile. Recommend Tier 4 classification, labor viable, conquest straightforward. One scout had added a personal footnote. She almost missed it. It read, "We made first visual contact on a city street. They were aware of our vessel. Rather than fleeing, a group of 7 individuals approached. The first one to reach us extended food items from their own provisions. We declined. They looked disappointed, not afraid. I have no framework for this. Flagging for review." It had never been reviewed. Sorrel set the file down. She sat with it for a while. Then she summoned Darius Cole to a formal meeting. He arrived 8 minutes later, still wearing the jacket, Rin asleep on his shoulder. Sorrel had prepared to ask him to leave the hatchling outside. She looked at Rin. Rin had not moved at all during the walk-over and showed no sign of waking. She decided, for reasons she did not name, to let it go. "Sit," she said. Darius sat. Sorrel studied him from across the table. He looked back at her without shifting in his seat, without the particular tension most species showed in her presence, the barely controlled urge to look small or look away. He was just watching her, the way he might watch a weather pattern, with mild, alert attention. "Why are you not afraid of my children?" she said. He seemed to think about it genuinely, not scrambling for the right answer, actually thinking. "They're Bobbies," he said. "Bobbies need warmth. I was warm and I was there." The simplicity of it landed in the room and sat there. Sorrel said, "What if they had hurt you?" Darius shrugged. It was a small motion, not dismissive, just honest. "Then they would have hurt me. They didn't, though." "You did not know they wouldn't." "No," he agreed. "Then you accepted the risk." He considered this. "I don't know if accepted is the right word. I just didn't think it was a big risk. They were small and cold and they came in on their own. Something cold and small coming to you in the night isn't usually looking for trouble." Sorrel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, and she said it directly, without wrapping it in diplomatic language, My people have ruled this quadrant for 3,000 years because every species fears us. Darius nodded slowly. I know. You don't behave like you know. I know it up here, he said, touching his temple. I just don't feel it the same way, I think. I spent 8 years as a field medic. You get a lot of things coming at you that are bigger and scarier than you. After a while, you stop leading with the fear because it doesn't help. Sorrel looked at him for a long time. What does help? She said. He thought about it. Doing the next thing that needs doing, he said. Baby's cold, you give it warmth. Person's hurt, you stop the bleeding. You just keep going to whatever needs attending. Outside the closed meeting room door, Commander Drav stood at his post and heard all of it through the imperfect soundproofing of the diplomatic wing. He was not supposed to be listening. He told himself he was monitoring for security concerns. He stood very still and listened to a human explain that he simply did not lead with his fear, and he found, to his considerable discomfort, that he had nothing to say against it. Inside, Sorrel stood. The meeting had not gone where she expected. She had prepared for politics, for maneuvering, for the particular kind of careful self-presentation that every species used when talking to her. She had not prepared for a man who just told her the truth, because it did not apparently occur to him not to. We will speak again, she said. Darius stood. Rin shifted on his shoulder and made a small sound without waking. Whenever you like, he said. He turned to go, then stopped. The archive, I'm guessing you read some of it. Sorrel said nothing. There's a lot of bad stuff in there too, he said. We've done a lot of damage. I'd rather you knew that than thought we were something we're not. She looked at him. I know, she said. I read that part also. He nodded, as if this was the answer he had hoped for, and left. The council summons arrived on a station-wide formal channel, which meant everyone on the station knew about the assembly before the day was half done. 7 elder council members convened to address what the official filing called a matter of royal lineage integrity. Suri read the summons twice and went quiet in a way that meant she was scared. Darius read it once and went to find something to eat. They want to sever the bond, Suri said. Formally, they'll reconfine the hatchlings, full quarantine from non-Draknari contact. Let's see what happens, Darius said. Darius, this is not a let's see what happens situation. Every situation is a let's see what happens situation, he said, and gave the last piece of his food to Kale, who had been sitting on the table watching him eat with an expression of transparent patience. Suri wrote 7 lines in her notes, none of which were about xenobiology. The assembly hall was the largest room on the station. 7 council elders sat at the curved head table, all of them old, all of them heavy with the particular weight of people who had not been disagreed with in a long time. Commander Drav stood at the security position near the east wall. His face was neutral. His posture was not. The council presented its case methodically. Hatchling bonding was a sacred developmental stage in Draknari culture, recorded in texts going back to their earliest history. The function of the bond was to imprint patterns of dominance, fire control, and territorial identity in the first months of life. These patterns, the eldest council member argued, required Draknari contact, not alien contact, certainly not human contact. To allow this to continue was to risk fracturing the identity formation of 3 royal children. The room was quiet when he finished. Then Commander Drav stepped forward and said, I'd like to submit the security record. Several council members looked mildly surprised. Drav was expected to have supporting evidence for reconfinement. They nodded. Drav read the record flat and factual, the way a soldier reads a field report. Since the date of initial hatchling contact with the human liaison, 0 injury incidents, 0 unauthorized escape events after the first night, normal developmental weight gain, normal scale hardening progression, first vocalization attempts recorded at day 6, approximately 4 days earlier than any previous record for Drakenari royal hatchlings. He closed the record. He offered no conclusion. He did not look at anyone in particular. He returned to his position at the wall and stood with his hands behind his back and his expression entirely clear. The eldest council member began to reply. Sorrel spoke. She did not raise her voice. She never needed to. The room found its silence the moment she began, the way a fire finds its heat. She did not argue sentiment. She did not argue tradition. She spoke from the thing she knew best, the thing she had ruled from for 3,000 years: logic, survival, resource. She said, "The greatest advantage any civilization can possess is something the others do not have and cannot replicate through force." She told them what she had found in the human archive, not the wars, not the machinery of it, but the pattern that ran through all of it, the thing that kept appearing across centuries and contexts. A species with a compulsion she had no Drakenari word for. She borrowed the human word. She called it tending. She said, "We have spent 3,000 years making the galaxy afraid of us. These creatures spent the same years making themselves go toward the thing that was suffering, not because it was safe, not because it was advantageous, because something in their architecture does not let them leave it alone." She said, "My children are showing the earliest vocal development on record. They are sleeping without interruption for the first time since they hatched. They did not find a rival. They found something their biology recognized before their minds could name it. We do not throw that away because our texts do not have a category for it yet." She looked down the table. "I am formally designating the human liaison, Darius Cole, as ward keeper of the royal hatchlings," she said. "This title has not been granted in 400 years. The last time it was granted, it changed the outcome of a war. I am confident in the precedent." The eldest council member opened his mouth. Elder Vaughn, who had not spoken once during the entire assembly, raised one hand. Everyone looked at him. "I vote in favor," Vaughn said, and settled back in his chair with the air of someone who has been waiting a long time to say exactly 3 words. The silence stretched. Then the second elder voted in favor. Then the third, slowly, with the expression of someone revising a lifelong assumption in real time. By the 5th vote it was decided. Drav at the east wall said nothing. His hand stayed behind his back. His face stayed neutral. After the session ended and the room cleared, he stood alone in the empty hall for a moment longer than necessary, and then he left without speaking to anyone. That night the diplomatic corridor was quiet. Darius was asleep. The data pad had slipped off his chest to the floor. Rin, Kale, and Asa were in their places, the vibration filling the small room with its low, steady presence. Sorrel came at 1:30. She stood in the doorway a second time. She looked at the same thing she had looked at 4 nights ago, a man asleep, unguarded, warm, with 3 royal children who had decided he was safe. The heart monitor read 57 beats per minute. The hatchlings were making the sound. She did not freeze this time. She stepped back from the doorway and sat down on the floor, against the wall of the corridor, just outside the open door. She did not call for a chair. She did not call for her guard. She sat on the floor of the diplomatic corridor with her back against the wall and her long legs stretched in front of her, and she stayed. Not ruling, not assessing. Just sitting near something warm, in the way that a creature sits near warmth when it has not felt it in a very long time, and is only just now admitting how cold it has been. She stayed until morning. Inside, the hatchling slept. Darius did not know she was there. He would not know for a while yet. When he eventually found out from Surrey, who had seen it on the corridor feed and written a full page of notes before she thought to mention it to him, he would be quiet for a moment. Then he would say simply, "She was welcome to." And he would mean it the way he meant everything, without drama, without angle, without the smallest awareness of how extraordinary that was. The galaxy had never produced anything quite like it. It probably should have been more afraid.